welcome to this breakout session on kind of communication, how we lead well in communication in the midst of crisis, and how we lead our communities through that. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I want to introduce myself. My name is Karmyn Bokma, and I am one of the pastors at the Meeting House. So I am the lead pastor at our Oakville location. We're a multi-site church, just to give you some context there, and that's the role I play. And my role in this context is actually just to facilitate this conversation. And so we have some questions that we'll kind of prime the pump with and get some conversation going. We'd love to hear from others as well, but do want to introduce to you, or I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have two contributors that will kind of grease the wheels, so to speak, to get the conversation going in regards to that. So Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Keith, you introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of proceed with how this is going to go.
Cool, thanks, Karmyn. Hey, everybody, my name is Jeff Lockyer, and I live in Niagara. And I'm the lead pastor of a church called Southridge, which is a multi-site church across the Niagara region that is more missionally oriented. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. I'm in the basement of my house right now, which is typically a clinic of my wife's. She's a massage therapist, but she's not working right now. So I have the whole clinic to myself, which is kind of a sweet gig. And 3 kids that are all teenagers, so they're pretty self-sustaining. I shouldn't be dealing with too many climbing all over me during this session. So great to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keith Smith. I am from Northeast Ohio. I'm a church planter. We've been my wife and I pastoring a church here for going on 8 years. I'm also a co-facilitator of the Jesus Collective cohort, second cohort in this pilot year. We have 4 daughters. 2 of them are in college. I actually have a daughter who's 21, which is unbelievable. I have another daughter. This is her senior year, so we're working through some of that loss and disappointment. And I have a 7th grader. So I am surrounded by a bunch of amazing women. And so this has been an interesting time to be closed up in this environment. I can't wait to get out and get with some guys. But anyway, looking forward to this.
So great. So Jeff and Keith will be beginning our conversation. Some of the things we're hoping to cover today, I think what we'll do is I'm going to just lob a question out, let Keith and Jeff get that conversation going. But then we really do want this to be an opportunity in an awkward Zoom world to have some conversation. And so what we'll do there is you'll see the chat function there. And if you haven't found that yet, at the bottom of your screen, I know everyone has already used Zoom a million times, but at the bottom of your screen, you can hit chat. And if you want to contribute in some way, either with a question or a comment, just indicate that, or type it all out if you want, or just say, like, I got something to say, and we'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we can kind of make use of that and participate. And if you do speak, if you wouldn't mind just saying your name and maybe where you're from. I think that's fun for all of us to get a sense of where we're all coming from today. I didn't say this, but I will say I also have kids. They're all young. They've been given a strict warning to not barge in my bedroom, but you may see a small child crawl on me at some point, as Keith and Jeff witnessed last week when we prepped for the session. So, but hopefully not. So let's jump right in. Some of the stuff, just to give a sense of where we're headed in this next 50 so minutes, some of the stuff we want to cover is what is key messaging we should be giving our communities? How do we engage in a way that is different now that we're all digital? What are some timely Jesus-centered teaching that we think we should communicate? So those are some of the things we want to get at, but also if you guys have questions for Keith or Jeff or whomever, I want to welcome that as well. But want to get this started and just Keith, I'll throw this to you first, and then Jeff, if you want to pipe up, what is a key message for our communities in this time, in the midst of everything that's swirling around? What would you identify, or what in your experience so far has been key messaging that you've really tried to hone in on in this new unprecedented time? Keith, we'll start with you.
Yeah, great question, Karmyn. One of the things that I find very valuable, not just in this crisis, but any crisis, is the importance of being great listeners. Don't make assumptions of what you think people need, what people need to hear, but to be more attuned to listening and listening well. Leading up to COVID-19 this last year, it seemed as if God was really speaking to me personally to communicate this to our church and those who I'm in relationship with. Uh, Wisdom comes from a place of being able to listen well. And in order to listen well, we have to be able to be still and be quiet. And sometimes that's hard, especially for preachers and pastors. A lot of people expect for us to give information. And I really have been trying to posture myself to listen well, because sometimes you can hear what's not being said, or you can hear the spirit behind what is being said and know how to navigate within that type of culture. And to be able to enter into the world of those that you're listening to. And so something that I've been learning over the last couple of years is, what does it mean to be an incarnational listener? And that really ultimately, you look at like Jesus modeling this, it is entering into the world of the person that you're trying to listen to, and not listening to them from your world. And so I think that is ultimately the challenge. I think, a lot of us are having conversations now on a regular basis in our home. And my wife is telling me things all the time, and I love it. But I can't just listen to what she's saying with the ears and understanding and processing of a man, because sometimes I just miss it. And so I have to enter into her world to say, okay, how does my wife think? What are the things that matter to her? And so this is what she's trying to communicate to me. And it helps me to hear her. And so as we're interacting with people in this time of crisis, we need to hear them, but we need to hear them from their world. And so incarnational listening is entering into their world and hearing from their perspective, getting still, being quiet, and out of that place, gaining wisdom to know how best to lead in that place.
That's so great. It's a great start for us, Keith. And I know when we spoke the other day, a line that stood out for me that you said was that the way that we can love right now is to be still. Which is so countercultural. And I really thought that was important for us as a culture, but as churches, that's the way we can show love, is to be still in this moment. Jeff, what do you have to add to that? What's your experience been with key messaging to your community?
Well, first things first, when Keith says that the most important communication message is actually the one that you listen to and receive, that's like close in prayer and take a break level. I mean, way more important than anything we're going to provide in messaging from my perspective. So I really appreciate Keith sharing that. There'd be a few real high level things in our context that have been important, but above all else, I would say the most important message that we've had to provide and re-provide and continuously kind of refine is simply the framing and the reminder for our people of what the church actually is. Not just what it is in a time like this, but what it actually is. Because so often in our culture and even in our church subculture, we can devolve into this kind of mindset where the church is the weekend gathering. And it's probably where we get our concept of, faith-based people being church goers, because church is a building or it's an event or it's a place you go, particularly on Sundays, where, for us, we understand the church as the Holy Spirit empowered, unified, kind of incarnational life and love of Jesus to restore the world. And that's a very different starting point than simply starting with church is an event on Sundays, and therefore let's talk about how our event on Sundays is going to pivot from live to digital or whatever. We've had to keep the main thing and say, hey, church is the incarnational life and love of Jesus. How do we be that uniquely in this season? And really every other conversation that we would have in our context flows out of that big idea. Obviously, our church is a little bit unique in the sense I said earlier, it's more missional. We have each of our locations or sites is defined by what we call an anchor cause. So a key community difference that we're trying to make in the world. So one of our churches actually has the largest homeless shelter in all of Niagara in its church building. And so that kind of gives you a reframing even of how we understand the role or the purpose of the church. But I would say all of our other communication has flowed out of that main messaging of just reminding and consistently re-envisioning our people of what the church is, and therefore what God intends us to be together in a time of crisis like this.
Yeah, so great. That's so key and so important. I have a few follow-up questions, but we do want to facilitate, like open it up and see if anyone either has a question in response to that or something that they want to add to the conversation. Is there anything that stands out to this community that you'd want to speak into as we talk about what is a key message as we lead our communities through this time? I'll create space for that if someone wants to pipe in. And reminder, just indicate in the chat because I can't see everyone's videos at this time. As people get warmed up to the idea of wanting to participate, Keith, want to just bounce back to you for a minute. What are some ways you found have been helpful to be an incarnational listener? What has that looked like in a season where there is actually quite a lot of information to disseminate out to your people? What has that looked like in your own practice to be an incarnational listener?
All right, there you go. I'm unmuted. Really being able to, for me, handle and be real with my biases, and understand that I am coming from a certain perspective. Not everyone thinks like me. And these are some things that I really struggle with, you know. I pastor in a community that is predominantly, it's a predominantly white community, and my church is a predominantly white church. There's a lot of tradition. There's an Amish community around me. You know, there's nothing to have a horse and buggy, you know, go past my street. And I realized being raised in, born and raised in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area, that there are definitely differences in how I see the world. And there are some things that from my own experience may make it more challenging for me to enter into another person's world. But if I'm communicating from this assumption that my communication is clear and they're understanding, then I'm already missing the point, you know. And so trying to learn how to have patience is key in incarnational listening. And I recently heard a definition for patience as honoring the pace of another person. And so when I'm trying to listen well, I have to honor the pace that the person who is sharing where they're at. And, you know, I may want to take it further. I may want to go deeper. I may want to go, you know, faster. But if I really want to listen well, I have to honor the pace that that other person is in. And so that's been a real challenge for me. But definitely it's given life in this.
That's fantastic. It looked as though Jordan has some things he'd like to comment on. It's in the chat. Jordan, I'll turn it over to you. And then Dan Weatherford, it said you raised your hand. So Dan, why don't we start with you actually? Why don't you chime into that? And then Jordan, after Dan speaks, why don't you kind of verbalize the questions you've given us in the chat there?
My name is Dan Weatherford. I'm from Riverside, California. I love the concept of incarnational listening. That really resonates with me. I've had some training in spiritual direction, and one of the key facets of spiritual direction consists in not only listening, but asking reflective questions. And I just think this is a great era with COVID and all that it oppressively brings to us. People are facing their fears front and center, whether they want to or not.
Yeah.
And they're surrounded by others who are grappling with the same thing. What a great opportunity for us to speak up and share with others in such a way that they know that we want to hear them. We are going to ask some questions that will help them to acquire the peace or the grace or the comfort that we're not about ourselves, which is so the modern era. And so I want to continue to applaud and encourage incarnational listening. And I want to plumb more of the depths of that myself. So thanks for letting me share.
That's a really good reflection, Dan. Appreciate that. And just so you know, it's currently snowing where I am today, so I'm a little envious of your location. It's just a little, you know, flurry in May. Jordan has requested that I kind of synthesize his questions because he's currently with his kid, as am I, as you can see. And actually his questions lead really well. Jeff, I want to throw to you actually what Jordan's asking about which mediums should we be using? Are weekly emails effective? And would actually love to throw this to the group to say, what are your best practices? But Jeff, want to tie this question in with that tension we find between wanting to be the incarnational church and yet the reality that we are absolutely in a digital reality and what that looks like. If you could speak to that, and then we'll get to some of Jordan's questions in the midst of that.
Yeah, one of the things I feel like we wrestle with as a community outside of COVID, just all the time, is the whole dynamic of the medium being the message. And so long as the primary medium for communicating your message is the gathering of people for an hour a week, I find that we can't help but kind of mistakenly devolve into the unspoken message that we send about what a life of faith is predominantly anchored in attending this gathering and maybe nothing else. And so, you know, even outside of COVID, we've had to figure out more diverse and creative ways to articulate vision and communicate, especially to our core community. In COVID now, I mean, we're trying anything and trying to see what sticks. So I know in our family ministry, for example, or in our location specific communities, we've told our leaders to pastor like it's the 1950s and just try the old fashioned, like pick up the phone and call a person and see how they're doing and find out what they need and remind them that we love them and we're here for them and want to engage them and things like that. So, I mean, are we emailing people? Yes. Are we leveraging social media? We're trying. Do we have communication in our digital weekend service? Absolutely. Have we had midweek kind of gatherings or meetings to articulate things? Yes. And we're trying a little bit of everything. I find that right now, one of the communication challenges for us is the disparate experience of this in our community, where I'm finding a majority of people are being affected by this in kind of minority ways, where a minority of people are being affected in a very majority way. They're on the front lines or they're being directly affected by the virus itself. And so even simplifying what you communicate, regardless of mode, down to a single audience, I found has been a mistake, because our community isn't in a one size fits all place. In fact, they're in drastically different places with drastically different reactions and drastically different anxiety levels. And so I guess all of that to summarize, we've tried to take much more of not a one size fits all, but a customized case by case, try everything and see what works for a few people kind of approach, because actually connecting with our community has been an even greater challenge than it normally is.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. A lot of realities that you're naming in there in the midst of what we find ourselves. I'm just looking through the chat here, and Keith, I'm going to direct this to you, and then if people want to pipe in, maybe do the hand raising function. How do we do, this is from Damon, and Jen, I see your question as well, and I want to hop back to that, but Damon asks, how do we define our leadership as service rather than directing because of positions of power? In connection, how do we communicate effectively but not domineering? And Keith, I want to throw this to you. You can answer however you want, but I'm reminded of when you paralleled this with the words Paul would write in his letters to the churches. Yeah. So anyways, I'll throw that to you and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, no, excellent. And that's a great question, Damon. You know, I recently, I was either reading or listening somewhere, and they brought out the point that when Paul was writing his prison epistles, it was him actually, his virtual sermons, if you could say, because it wasn't a face-to-face communication. And you know, there's nothing like face-to-face, you know, and you could posture in how you communicate because so much is caught from our body language and our posturing of service. But when you are in a place where you cannot be face-to-face, again, I love it, but I'm so glad Paul wasn't face-to-face because we have some incredible epistles that came out of him being in prison and having to write to communicate. But Paul starts every single letter with grace and peace unto you. You know, grace and peace, favor, blessing, wholeness. That's coming out. He starts every letter that way. And I believe that if everything that we start or everything that we do begins with grace and peace, and grace and peace carries the message, or it carries our listening, or it carries our questions, that is putting us in a posture of being able to communicate the heart of the Father. You know, Jesus said that he came to reveal the Father. And when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And what we see Jesus is he's a servant. And I don't know how many of us view the Father that way, but the Father looks like Jesus and he's a servant. And so as we're communicating grace and peace, it should carry in our words, even if it sounds as if we are in a place where we're giving instructions. It shouldn't come from a place of being domineering if we are revealing also the Father who's revealed in Jesus as a servant. So I don't know, Damon, if that exactly answers your question, but again, for me, that's the challenge that I have is grace and peace coming out of what I'm communicating.
So beautiful. Thanks, Keith. I think that's such a beautiful posture. And Damon, that's a fantastic question. I think always in leadership, there's that tension of understanding what it means to actually lead out of service, a service place, but now more than ever, because from all sides, we're being pressed with urgency, with confusion that needs clarity, with stuff we've never had to deal with before. And it can be, I think in some ways, at least in my limited experience in these last 8 weeks, so tempting to fall into the role of more of that domineering or more of just delegating or instruction or whatever that might look like, and lose that posture. And so Keith, I think that's a beautiful word. Feel free others to pipe in. Jen, I'm going to pick on you. I think your comment there a little bit up in the chat is fantastic. And I'd love to see your face and have you just speak to that or say that if you want. I'll give you a moment to unmute and unvideo. I can't see you, so I don't know where you are if you want. Otherwise, I'll just highlight that. But Jen, are you around?
I'm here, I think.
Yeah, we see you. Why don't you just say that again or just speak to that a little bit?
So I was just, same comments as others. Let me find what I actually said. Yeah, being challenged by assumptions was where I started thinking about that. But so much of what I'm doing just now, I'm in Scotland, by the way. You can probably tell by the accent. We're, finding that there's so much time needed, time to process, time to kind of connect with people in ways that are meaningful. And it is that thing, going back to the old-fashioned, pick up the phone. Emails have gotten longer. We find people are communicating in so many different ways. It does take a lot of time. We've got a fantastic pastoral team, but this is the time for time. We're not driving around like mad things anymore, which is a great thing. But it is something about being real with each other and staying with each other whilst you're figuring out what's the actual question somebody is asking, or what's the actual need. And sometimes it's nothing other than, am I normal? Does everybody else feel like this? And I think that's just so important. People are valuing that so much. And then it's being passed on. We're finding that people are now registering what it means to be real with each other, to be real with their faith. And it's the small encounters, because obviously we can't easily gather. Well, we can't gather at all. But coming onto the Zoom platforms and things has been really interesting. We've relaunched our cafe church online and things, and it's a bit like this. You've got loads of people, and there was such excitement to see each other. I wanted to kiss the screen and kiss each other, which is a bit weird. So I didn't. But there's something so important about seeing each other as best we can, but hearing each other as best we can. And yeah, I think it's the genuineness of relationship and the gentleness that comes from that. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's beautiful. Great. And Sean, I'll pick on you as well. Nice to see your face in there too. You had a great comment about incarnational listening. Reflective questions are helpful. Are there some you find yourself going to, or is it really dependent on the context? So this may be a quick answer, but want to give you that chance to speak to that, because reflective questions are beautiful. What do you have to say about that? Hi, Sean.
Hello, how are you?
Well, thank you.
No, I really liked what Dan said, and I really agree with him. I think it's a time where people are navigating a lot of things in their lives, and they just need the opportunity to be able to discover and encounter Christ in their life. And I think that helps their own journey as well to grow, is being able to, I love the expression earlier that we all heard about clinging to Christ, pressing into Jesus and holding on. If we can help people do that, I think that's a gift to them. And I think reflective questions help them accomplish that. So I really appreciated what Dan said, and I just made a quick comment.
Awesome. Lovely to hear from you. Jonny C here from Circle of Hope. Do you want to speak to this? And if I don't see you pop on, I'll read it, but that's
sure. Thanks.
Yeah, Jonny, thanks.
We've been able to communicate. I'm Jonny from Circle of Hope in Philadelphia. We've been able to communicate decisively, but what's helped us not seem authoritative or authoritarian, really, or dictatorial, is by trying to seek consensus and listen to experts in the field and to others. If we speak from a place that, and we tell people this came from a process of dialogue and trying to come to some mutuality, that helps us come to discerned conclusions that feel collaborative and feel communal. Allowing people to talk back to our decisions and question them is an important part of our community as well. And also being mindful of power dynamics, you know, not just, although this is important, not just in terms of race and gender and other things like that, but also churches generally have power centers and power families. And so if a lot of your answers are coming from those people, you might want to question some of those practices, I would say.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonny. That's such an important thing to put in front of us in this time, is that being aware, take inventory of those sorts of things like power dynamics in the context of your leadership. We have just under 20 minutes, so I have a few more questions I'd like to lob out there, and we'll see where things go or land. And if there's something that you join this session where you're like, I really had hoped we'd tackle this, please put that in there and we can redirect. We want to make sure that this time is helpful and productive for you and encouraging for you. So I'll watch the chat if someone says, please, can we answer this one question? But until we do that, the question I want to throw out there, okay, so what are those blind spots or assumptions that we really need to be aware of, even perhaps more than ever in this time? So Keith or Jeff, I'll let maybe one of you two start the conversation and we'll see who else chooses to join in. Whichever one of you unmutes first, I'm going to go for Jeff.
I guess that's me. One of the blind spots that I would say we've, in a real kind of exciting way, discovered through this COVID pandemic is how much we were relying on our programs and our primary programs to drive the lifestyle of full devotion to Jesus that we intend. And obviously, especially as staff and as leadership, you tend to be more program focused anyways, but we always in theory believe that these programs will drive a lifestyle. So our gatherings are going to drive a lifestyle of intimacy with Christ, and our groups are going to drive a lifestyle of interconnected, close, kindred spirit relationship, and our anchor causes are going to drive a friendship that makes a difference with the marginalized. But in absence of these programs, our leaders have had to be creative and figure out ways to actually pole vault people over the programs or not depend on the programs and just get people, living the lifestyle without having the programs to drive them. And it's been amazing how we've been able to encourage a practice-based faith without as much reliance on the gathering, or encourage and foster mutual member ministry where there's that no need among them kind of intercommunal care. And especially in our anchor causes, I mean, we've just been inventorying lists of people in our locations who are part of the marginalized communities that we serve and connecting them with lists of people in our congregation, and one by one saying, listen, your job is to connect with this person that you have a bit of pre-connection with, to socialize, to support, and to surprise them. And if you can, kind of run with that, really life on life, that would be great. And having kind of empowered people to that, now maybe a month into trying to innovate in that way, it's amazing to watch how much of this way of life of full devotion to Jesus hasn't just been possible, but actually has been inspired and stimulated without the programs that we formerly thought that lifestyle depended on. So I think for me as a senior leader, my head in some ways is upside down now in the middle of this, trying to figure out, okay, so how is our ministry model really going to work when we reopen if our primary theories or our primary assumptions about our model of ministry and what was required actually haven't proven as true as we thought?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Keith, I'll let you jump off of that if you have more you want to add.
Yeah, not a whole lot, because that was really, really great job, Jeff. I love that. We're seeing similar things also. It seems as if when something is removed, you're placed in a situation where things that you maybe have taken for granted, which is community, which is conversation and engaging. I have found that our people are being very much more intentional with connecting and checking in on people and being attentive to people's needs. And again, you would think just having our face-to-face events, gatherings would create that, but sometimes we take it for granted. And so I see that in these type of situations, people are realizing the fragility of what they have always expected would be there. And so now they're being more intentional to make those type of connections. And another place that was kind of an assumption is that everyone would be able to stay connected. And I'm realizing, especially those that we would consider to be most vulnerable, which are those who are, older, they don't necessarily have the technology or the ability to understand and navigate into technology the same way as maybe others can. And they're not able to come out. And so that was something that I appreciate people stepping up and identifying people who are in those places and doing what they are able to do to connect them. And so if it's, you know, coming to someone's house to help with their technology, finding ways to social distance by standing outside in the yard while they're inside, you know, the script, you know, just, I love seeing how people are rising to the occasion. And some of those things I just didn't see before some of this hit.
That's fantastic, Keith. Really appreciate that. Dan, why don't you chime in there as well?
I'm just touched. Everything that's being said totally resonates. And I would just merely add that in some ways, this era of COVID is demanding of the church that we become real, we become visceral, that we're not talking polity and theology anymore. It's where the rubber meets the road. There are some in our fellowship, and we have a small one, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 100 membership in our fellowship. There are some who are on the cusp of collapse now. There's others who will be in a couple of months. And there are some who are well ensconced, they're well situated. And it used to be that we could talk about who's my neighbor and what does it mean to love your enemy and all those things. And now what we're discovering is, are we really going to live these things out and act on them? We can't be theoretical anymore. We need to act, and we need to begin to maybe embrace Acts 2, the sharing from house to house as each has need, and that has to become real in tangible ways. And that's very confronting and challenging, but also it's a call to authenticity and becoming more concrete. And I love earlier the reference to it gives us as the church an opportunity to extend shalom to the world. And it begins in our own neighborhood.
Thanks, Dan. That's really, really great. Jeff, a few comments, just an affirmation of something that you said, and then some questions. I wonder if you can respond. William's asking, love the way you just defined that big question. Do you have specific processes that you went through to define how you pole vault over existing programs? William, if you want to chime in with other stuff, feel free. Otherwise, Jeff, feel free to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me affirm Dan's comment, because that's really the essence of our core message right now, is rather than a faith that is fundamentally spent talking about our faith, we believe the church is to be the incarnational life and love of Jesus that affects its community. And COVID has removed in so many ways the distraction of us over talking about our faith. Heard someone once say, when all's been said and done, a lot more has been said than done. And all of the opportunities to like be over saying stuff have been removed. And now you're just left sitting there thinking, so are we going to do something or not? And it really is an inspiring time from my perspective. To William's question about processes, like in our context, again, this is just our local church's example, these are quite crude. So, you know, our location pastors, for example, who typically would rely on the program of our small groups to cultivate that mutual member ministry and create the no need among us dynamic. Obviously, we've tried to still lean into those and leverage the power of Zoom and technology, but they literally, first of all, they created a list of everyone we had in our database that wasn't connected to a small group and just started phoning them and divvying them up among other pastoral staff and key volunteers and elders to say, hey, can you call these people? Can you call these people? And just, you know, instituted, again, this is making it up as you go, but just a phone call ministry. Another thing that we've tried that's been very effective is basically a form on our website called Need Help, Give Help. And if you have a practical need, and if your small group or the phone call process hasn't kind of grabbed you yet, you know, fill out the form. Or if you want to contribute to meeting a need, fill out the form in a way that you might have capacity. And so far, we've had dozens of examples of brokered relationship to meet a need that was cited. That's been really remarkable, that we would have never had those stories before, outside of being forced into this, far more remedial, almost crude way of doing ministry. The even cooler part is right now, the laundry list for give help is longer than our list for need help. And so our capacity right now is kind of waiting to continue to be able to lean in and step up into that. So that's been one example. Obviously in our anchor causes, because they're all so different, again, there are very different strategies, but the big idea has been just to simply focus our attention on the end in mind, the life on life care and support and connectivity to the love of Christ, rather than over focusing on the means to that end, which has typically been what the program is. Often as leaders, we can focus on the, designing and scheduling and content development, whatever, of the program, but we found that actually can be a distraction from the greater end that it's ultimately intended to serve.
Jeff, thanks so much for that. We are down to 6 minutes. So we're going to do what we can to squeeze every last richness out of these 6 minutes. There's a few questions there. Sean, I'm hoping that what Jeff just said sort of answers your practice-based faith experience. So maybe we'll skip over that one. Hopefully there's a way we can all interconnect once this whole conference is over. But curious, Keith, Jeff, anyone else, what are sermon themes now and moving forward? And then if time, James, right below that, really love your question. If we have time to speak to it, I want to, but if not, want to draw everyone's attention, because I think that's actually such a prudent question for us to steward in this time. This life on lifestyle growth that we are inevitably having to experience is beautiful. How do we deal with the temptation to revert back to maybe the ordinary way it always was once we're back in context? So want everyone to be aware of that. That's fantastic. If we have time to talk about it, we will. But Jeff, Keith, what are the sermon themes you're kind of launching into where we are now moving forward? Keith, you go first.
Yeah. It's interesting that a lot of this is taking place leading up to Resurrection Sunday. And now we are, in Eastertide and leading up to Pentecost. One of the themes that I think is really important in this was followers of Jesus, we are people of the resurrection. And what we're looking at is people are experiencing a lot of loss. And it's coming in different ways, finances, businesses, jobs, experiences, seniors who aren't able to go through their senior year, people who are studying abroad who their programs ended early and they came home after saving up money for, a long time. And we're trying to navigate people through those processes. And so a theme that I found to be really important is the theme of resurrection. And when you find this in followers of Jesus, regardless of what you're facing, even a loss, ultimately, if you steward that in the right way, produces a gain. And showing how Jesus won by losing. And that is really key because even our losses, if we plant them as seed, actually could come forth later and have resurrection life on it. And so just stewarding loss in a way that still brings life is a key theme for us.
Beautiful. Jeff, where are you at with sermon themes heading forward?
We're in a, right after Easter, 9-week series called Working Out Our Faith Home Edition, which is designed to do nothing more than teach people and equip them with a practice-based faith. So we envisioned them to a practice-based faith in the first week. And now we're just walking through some of the classic spiritual practices, not just Bible reading and prayer, but silence and solitude and fasting and celebration and simplicity and Sabbath and things like that, in hopes that they'll use this opportunity and extra space that we've been given in the slowness of this season to experiment with all of these different ways to, like Brother Lawrence said, to practice the presence of God. And at the end of the day, we're feeling like this is probably, we were talking about this the other day, this is probably something that we're going to want to do on a regular basis, because if we believe that the Christian life is only ultimately something that Jesus can live, and that our job as followers of Jesus is simply to remain in or abide in him, then the best gift that we can give our people is to teach them the behaviors of what remaining or abiding in Christ looks like. And so already we're like week 3 or 4 into it, we're seeing real good traction. But when you talk about, I saw it was Sean's question was how we're trying to cultivate a practice-based faith. We've got a link on our webpage, on our website called Spiritual Practices, to try to provide some supplementary supports, especially each week tied into the various practices that we're teaching. But we're giving like prime large group gathering attention to this right now because we feel like it's the best gift that we can give our people these days.
So good. Okay, we're down to like 1 minute, 30 seconds, which then all the weight lands on my shoulders to know how are we best going to steward this? There's a few other questions there. We'll quickly throw this one out. Alex, great question. What about young adults? People under that age 30 bracket, email may not be their way to communicate, phone isn't. Does anyone just have like a practical tip to say, here's what we're doing with our young adults community to keep them engaged? Let's kind of land there. And then Keith, Jeff, I'll give you guys the last word. If anyone has anything practical when it comes to young adults. I'm not under 30. I can no longer speak with expertise to this question.
I'll throw something out real quick.
Or Dan.
Empower them. There are various ways that they are looking to have an impact. And if you know them and you have seen that they can be trusted, give them an opportunity to serve in real ways, and they'll want to stay connected.
Beautiful. That's a fantastic reframing, not just to say, how do we talk to them, but how do we invite them in to this layer of leadership in this unprecedented time? Jeff or Keith, any final word before we release people today? And it's fine if you don't, I'm throwing you on the spot.
All I would say is in our world, the big idea is that the medium is the message. When it comes to communicating, the medium is the message. And if the medium of our message of Christ is messages, then the message we're sending is that following Jesus is about listening to and talking about and debating messages. If the medium is a people arisen and unified in the power of Christ, extending his love in incarnational ways, then we're sending the message that Jesus is alive and he's for real and you can experience him. So for us, that's how we're being ravaged these days. If the medium is the message, what's our primary medium and are we most leaning into that? And I would challenge and encourage everyone else to consider that as well.
So good. Keith, want to add anything onto that?
No, this has been awesome. Thank you, Karmyn, and everyone else for their contributions. I love what Jesus Collective is doing in this, and I'm just excited about the momentum that's coming from this movement. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks, Jeff and Keith, for providing the conversation, and to everyone for contributing. Hope it's been a rich time.